thank you all for being here. I'm Emil from Forge. We're a national trans-led anti-violence organization who do a lot of work supporting trans and non-binary survivors of violence and the people who support those survivors. We're super excited to be hosting this evening with the lovely facilitator Matthew, who is going to take us through our workshop today.
Thanks for the welcome. And thank you everybody for coming out tonight or this afternoon, depending on where you are, or if you're watching this later. Just want to welcome those of you who are joining us on YouTube. I really want to welcome those of you who are also fully in the kitchen, or you're at your desk where you are often, or you're laying down and not even looking at the screen. I really welcome you to be exactly where you are. That's exactly where that feels good for you. Oh, and if you came to, and you're watching this and you're like, I had to get in the right spot, I encourage you to find the right spot that also feels like the most comfortable and supportive for you. That may be a chair with the worst lighting in the house because you like it. That may be on the floor because you like it. That may be with an animal like nuzzled right up against you. And that's really, really welcome. My name's Matthew. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a caramel colored skin person who has a mini afro that's black with a black dress with pink and blue and lavender flowers on it and some dangly earrings. Really want to keep welcoming you to not have to look. Anything that's on screen for the most part will also be said out loud so that you can also engage that way. And for those of you who are engaging live, you're going to have a different experience than the people who are on Zoom. I mean, who are on YouTube later. They're going to get to do some things that unfortunately we just can't do in Zoom. And you're going to get to do some things that on YouTube later are a lot harder to do. And we'll sort of go through this arc together during our time where we'll spend a little bit of time. I think about it as like time traveling. Like there'll be moments where we're in the past, there'll be moments where we're stretching into the future, there'll be moments where we're thinking about the present. I'm a total sci-fi geek. I grew up there. Deep Space Nine, Star Trek was like on my TV as a kid. I would be like outside my parents' room watching it. And I have learned to really continue to learn from science fiction. Years ago, Emil at Forge gave me a challenge around looking at more fiction if I'm interested in helping change the world. And that shifted how I show up in the world in a way that I actually love it. I love having a comic on the floor next to me as I'm also getting to pull up an academic book off a shelf with Play-Doh nearby. And as we're in this journey together, I wanted to start off with a song to help us start to land. It's a song that keeps coming back, that was gifted to me, and I want to share with you. You do not carry this all alone. No, you do not carry this all alone. This is way too hard for you to carry this on your own. So you do not carry this all alone. And that's our invitation. How in this evening do we hold a little more of this load together? The title of this was Grief, Love, and Liberation. And it felt impossible to have one word of just grief there because that's not always the word that we use. to explain the experiences that bring us into this winding place. Like the definition of grief, for those of you who are like, I just need a definition. I offer this loose definition of just grief is a natural reaction to loss or change, however it shows up. I'm grateful to get to do this today, like hosted by Forge, really supporting trans and non-binary folks as well as our larger communities. But like we trans and non-binary folks know change in an intimate way that many others have different relationships to. And so there are nuances around great grief that I want to welcome in, and I want to welcome the other experiences too that you bring. There'll be moments where I look off to the side to just have notes because I love to be able to connect and I'm like reading the chat actively. Yeah. And some of the ways that I'm thinking about us coming in, like I called this the winding path because I think about it as a place where we're taking all of these different paths in. And I don't know if you've ever hiked. I didn't grow up hiking. It's something only as an adult I've started to do. And one thing I've gotten to learn is like sometimes you cross other people on a path and sometimes you see the echo of them too, the thing they scrawled in, the footsteps, the branch they pushed aside. And so we're getting to meet in this moment, whether it's at the same time for those live and those joining later. And the ways that we're coming in, like we have so many experiences of this thing called grief and so many practices. And today will be littered with like options for how you may navigate these experiences as invitations towards more wholeness. And we'll dig into that piece as we go along. But I just want to name like there are some ways we're showing up in the room. Like I'm thinking about grief partially because I just lost my oldest pet. Her name was Sadie. She was an 18-year-old cat. She was my partner calls her Shady Sadie, Queen Sadie, the shady old lady. And she was so scratchy voiced and sweet, and I miss her and I feel her echoes in the house around me. And as she died, I leaned into a grief practice that I didn't know was a practice so many other people did, which was rearranging the furniture. Like I immediately went into, okay, it's time to shift how the room is set up. I'm going to clean up. I'm going to shift this place. And as I did that process, I just got to feel the loss over and over again and the sweet memories that linger there. I got to not want her to be gone fiercely. And I got to just feel so grateful that she got some relief. And that's a practice so many people use. There's a practice of people coming in to a friend's home and rearranging the furniture so that when you come back after that initial moment of loss or change, you get to really shift with how has my landscape changed around me? How has my world shifted? Because your world shifts. Ah, I'm also thinking about how can we hold each other in that? There are so many ways. I'm thinking about the grief practice that I did with a friend of mine after the election. She's an organizer, and we just got into a place first of singing and then of just yelling and welcoming rage. I'm a big fan of get some plates and break them. If you can get like $5 and go to a thrift store, you can get some plates and find a place that's safe. I mean, you could go to a rage room too. Those aren't always in everyone's budget, and I like being outdoors. Um, and actually get to grieve. The yelling is a way of grieving, the crying is a way of grieving. There are practices around grief of getting lost, to actually just let yourself be lost in the messiness of change. A practice I learned as a young person was the term walkabout, the moment of transition where people say, you're just not going to know what's going on, so we're going to let you just go. And meander and get lost and be in the lostness of it, which I find such a teacher in this world that says you have to know the right thing that's next. I'm joining from the US and I live in Philadelphia land cared for by the Lenni Lenape people, also called Lenape Hoking. And this place is a place where I've had home for the longest amount of time. And I'm so grateful for the moments I just get to get lost and lose track of where I am, because in the US, I'm taught so much that I need to know what's next. I really want to welcome those of you who are coming in from paths where like grief is stillness and people just don't talk about it. And I welcome those of you for whom food is the thing, the love language that shows up. That's how you process. You get in the kitchen, you eat. I welcome those of you who have wailing practices. I think about the practice of sitting Shiva, to have people there with you to support you, and who can cry with you actively. I also welcome those of you who dance, like the people who came in from like I process this through dance and movement or through a second line band. Before I knew what a second line was, my dad said, at my funeral, I want a second line band, like a little mini parade, music, brass going. I welcome those for you. That's how you process. And if you are living in New Orleans, welcome you for that too. I also want to welcome the ways in which just overwhelm is what you know. You know that feeling of like, this is just feeling like too much. And those moments when you can feel the overwhelm, and those moments when you just need to numb and your body says, this is more than enough. The dissociation that shows up is welcome. There's not a right way. There are many ways. And when we can honor that strategy, because numbing is a strategy our bodies use to survive, it's okay to not be overwhelmed all the time, just as it's okay to let yourself be overwhelmed. I also want to welcome those of you who, like, those of you who have those experiences where you, like, I feel like this for me is like a particularly like queer trans experience of going home and grieving having to leave the place where you found community because you want to stay there, but you have to go home. Or the moments where your home is the place you love and you hate to leave it. I just think about my friends who live in rural areas who say like, I have to leave sometimes to find community and I hate that. I'm so glad I can get the community I want, but I hate having to leave my home for that. That's an experience of grief. That transition, that change that doesn't line up. Really welcoming in those parts of you that crave leaving and those parts that just want to stay where you are. I really welcome the path that is also song I sang, but also those of you who have like the mixtape that you pull out that just brings you to a place. We'll be sharing resources afterwards, and some of you who are watching on YouTube will get to like get access to some of them as it's happening. But like sometimes a playlist is a portal. Like I have grief playlists that help me sometimes when my mind is like, no, 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 you're not gonna feel that thing right there. And I'm like, "No, but I'm ready." And that music can actually be a portal in. Like we're gonna invite you to bring in your path here as we go today. And as we go into these paths, I also want to welcome in the lineages, the ancestors, the people, the 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 ones who travel with us. And for those of you who are on Zoom, I'm putting in the chat this like invitation. It says, who are your ancestors? you want to welcome, who from your lineage. They could be blood, they could not be blood, they could be people you never met, and how who that you want to welcome. Like I welcome in this moment my great great aunt Annie, who I never met, and my great great aunt Annie. I come from a family that is very Christian in a particular way that had no room for my queerness, no room for my transness. I just heard stories of the one trans person in the family who showed up at a funeral once in a dress. That was the story. That's it. Nobody knew, nobody explains anything else about this person. And so for years, I was like, I feel so alone. And I don't even know this person's name. Well, my great great aunt Annie wasn't that person, but my great great aunt Annie did not follow that same norm. She kept a gun by her pillow because she loved to have sex and with younger people, um, even in her 40s. And she was like, and sometimes they may come at me, so nobody move my gun. I'm going to keep myself safe. I welcome that story in because she, for me, is like an ancestor who is often disregarded. I welcome the movement ancestors. I'm going to name some that I also see in the chat too, like Heidi is really welcome here. Eric is welcome. I really want to like welcome in the family that never told you stories about ancestors, as well as the ones who have, and your grandparents are welcome. Welcome in Douglas. I like grief is an invitation often into the echoes of who is coming with us. I welcome in those ancestors, yes, who gave you strength when you're afraid. I welcome in your great Aunt Barbara, your great Aunt Jewel. That council of aunties is really welcome. And the ones who you haven't named yet or you don't know how to type, that you feel some tug that you want to actually welcome, I welcome those. Just as I invite each of us to not feel forced to name or welcome or relate with ancestors who we just don't fucks with. We don't have to do that. But I do welcome Dulce and Demetria and that Aunt Thelma. And I invite you as you go along tonight, if someone comes to you or an experience comes to you that you want to welcome, to share that in the chat or in YouTube in the comments if those are on, to just share. These are experiences that I'm connecting with and I'm bringing in. So as we have these different ways in, I sit with like, what do I do with these experiences? And this is where I lean into art oftentimes. And so tonight I got to work with two different people outside Forge to help build tonight, one of whom is named Mo Burrows, who was like, I want to be there, I want to be there, um, and is in an airport actually traveling to my home tonight to visit and said, I don't know. And I was like, let's not do this in the airport. Let's let this actually have a sense of ease because airports will have its own level of stress. And so, like, this is one of the ways in which we'll invite in a little bit of time traveling is we're going to go like back 24 hours from today where Mo and I got to talk. And Mo was writing for tonight and had built some writing to share with folks tonight. And so they'll be on screen, and as they're sharing, there are moments of what they share that are more intense than others. And those of you who got a care package, I invite you to get your sensory stick if you want that. You don't have to take any notes here or later. There'll be some journal prompts for those of you who want them. There'll be a break too if you don't have it and you want to get it. But and I invite you to like get that cup of tea or that sensory stick. And I'm gonna play this short recording with Mo. It's about 29 minutes of us preparing to hold space with you. And so I'm going to bring up the screen share right now. And I will mention that this conversation with Mo, if you're using closed captions, didn't have, we didn't caption it when we were in Zoom. So we have a transcript later, and the link to that transcript is going to go in the chat for those who would like to read the transcript along with this. And if you're watching it on YouTube, that'll have transcripts right in embedded. I'll play this video now. Welcome, Mo. I am really glad to be doing this with you and to get to welcome in your voice here and want to give you a chance to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm really glad to be here, and it's nice to be wanted in this space. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mo Burrows. I am not a counselor for grief or anything like that. I'm just a human being who's had trauma and grief and who wants to discuss that with other people and reach out and see how other people deal with it. And maybe other people can get some sort of solace or usefulness out of how I've seen and dealt with grief. I think this is a really exciting topic, and I would love to come back to it several more times with you if that opportunity ever came up.
That's part of why I was really excited to invite you in, actually, because it's a topic I find that you're energized to talk about, even though it's not the easiest to talk about.
No, it's really difficult, but grief almost ruined my life. Um, I was grieving before my father died for years, and then years after, and other things too. It is, and talking about it, trying to rediscover myself in it has helped me not just be an entirely depressed, um, flattened kind of a person, which is what I was doing before I started addressing grief directly in therapy and in my own recreational reading.
Yeah. So with that processing and how it's gotten you there, I really want to move us then into the piece, and then we'll pause partway through. You've been working on this piece as a writer, as an artist. You have so many different hats that you wear in the world, and I see
Mm.
you as someone who carries so much honest creation energy and a
Mm.
radio voice on top of it. And so that even if people are listening and they're like, I don't want to look at the screen, I think it's such a gift that you bring that your voice carries through in a
Oh,
way
wow.
that I'm grateful to get to hear from you. And logistically, yeah, we'll pause partway through this piece you've been working on. We'll talk about it. Then we'll hear the rest of this piece that you've been working on, and then we'll close this section.
Sounds good to me.
Right. So then I'll pass it over on to you. I'll turn my video off while you do this first part of the reading, and then I'll turn back on for that conversation.
Makes sense. Gotcha. Okay, so I'll begin. One's grief cannot be parsed from all of one's other griefs. They exist simultaneously, layering themselves softly, but increasingly heavily on many a heaving back. The volume of grief ebbs and flows, of course, but it is never absent. My Blackness will not let it be so, nor my queerness, fatness, poverty, nor my female presenting body, nor my neurospiciness. When I take this body out of doors, when I run my eyes over news, when I scroll social media, there they are. Reason upon reason to feel afraid, myriad ways to know me and mine are not welcome, 1,000 opportunities to feel specifically targeted by hatred, a trillion avenues to feeling immense sadness. It's a lingering sort of sadness. It's the kind of sadness you wake up with and go to bed with. It's the kind of sadness that clings and gives you a filter to see through that limits the way you interpret the world. It feels like actual fabric, a weighted blanket that's been dampened by what I know and drags on the joints, making little tasks and everyday occurrences dimmer and more taxing. My Blackness might be the first thing about myself that I realized may set me apart, may set me up, may choke me like a struggling sapling into cracked and bulky concrete, stuck in time with uneven hearts and forgotten initials. A white friend's mother pointed out to me that I was Black one day. I hadn't thought about it. I was small and hadn't thought to name my skin. She said it with a tone I don't understand to this day, but it made me feel apart and ashamed. And the first time I knew what to call my skin was the first time I grieved it. then and ever after, for my dad, for my siblings, for every Black person I meet. To be aware that you are Black in this country is to know you are hated. The more I know, the more I know. We are hated here. Walking the street, I know some of the people that look at me and they wish with all their hearts that I wasn't there. Casual wishes for my undoing lance my heart. Not so casual wishes frighten and anger. Flight, fright, fight. Sometimes, yes, I know how dear feel. New laws catch me up. New prejudices surprise, increasingly less so. Old distastes settle on new ears. I see kinfolk pushed up against cars that flash gang colors. And first I fear for them and take out my phone, but afterwards I feel so deflated. Preemptive grief for the killings I am terrified of slides into grief without the anger and sits heavy on my heart and drains me for long moments. What I wouldn't give to walk down the street without fearing for us. What has been surprising me most lately is the deep, deep woe I've been feeling as I unpack how I used to feel about my country. And the slow dawning coinciding with another late in life realization of my genderqueer self. And these two identities, grieving patriot and emboldened transgender, have decided to balance themselves evenly on my tired shoulders. The weeping, bereft patriot in me feels constantly dazed. The grief of being duped and pushed to loving a gritty, gray machine that wants to chew my bones and realizing it. I was a believer, early days. I was proud to say the pledge in unison, back when I just knew Americans went to distant lands to do charity works and stop terrible things all around the world. Rescuers and leaders. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. My deep grief over losing my pride in my American identity is compounded by the fact that this home of mine, which stopped providing the false ease of knowing I'm best and right, seems intent on erasing me. It hates me. It wishes I were dead. It wishes it could grind my fatness and blackness and all the rest into dust. It hates that I now know that the indigenous people of this land aren't extinct, that US chattel slavery was a special kind of cruel and inhuman. It hates that I no longer buy into false narratives about colorism, texturism, or featureism, that I know how to look past my Western American lenses to see human beings. How long as a child did I dream of going to some far off place to dig a well or build a learning center, only to neglect the people right here in this country who suffer hugely? For the price of a cup of coffee, you can save a life. For the price of a cup of coffee, you can be a savior over there. We were leaders and do-gooders, generous and magnanimous, omnipotently correct in all things worldly. I felt duped long before my pride thinned.
I'm just going to take a breath and invite others to as well.
Mm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mhm. Yeah. It feels almost blasphemous to ask questions. And I think
No, ask them, ask them, ask them.
I appreciate it because I see the invitation there. And one thing I got really curious about was the layering that you mentioned. There was a phrase you mentioned that says, uh, some a grieving patriot and emboldened transgenderness.
Right.
And I'm curious about the experience of two things at once,
Mm,
how grief often has more than one thing wrapped in it.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Could you share a little bit more about that holding the multiplicity there?
Sure. Well, the reason why I speak of these two in particular is because they're both, I've realized they're not actually new. I've just recently realized that these things have been weighing on me, or that some Well, the country weighs on me. My transgenderness doesn't, but it's treated in this country like it should weigh me down. And I refuse to let that happen. But the reason why these two griefs were important to bring up is because they have just been dawning on me in a new way. And holding them both and holding other different kinds of griefs, it can feel overwhelming, but these parts are still parts of you. And so it also feels like recognizing parts of myself and coming home in a way, which is something else I've been concentrating on, being more at home in myself and facing these things that are so big and that really do smash me down from time to time when I'm feeling like I don't have the energy to combat the negativity. Um, when that's not the case, I feel pretty happy and satisfied with myself that I'm getting to know me better and that I'm getting to learn how to walk this world in a way that is least harmful to me.
Mm. I appreciate the nuance there too of the like better, least harmful, like the degrees rather than
Hmm.
the all or nothingness of it. That I feel like so much of my American identity was taught to say like there is good and there is bad in
Right.
a way that set me up so often to feel like a failure
Yeah, absolutely.
or an outsider in a way that just it felt blasphemous to bring up that word from before.
Yeah.
And one thing that I know that you often hold in relation to grief is the more than human, like that
Hmm.
humans are but one part.
Hmm.
And I'm really curious as you're welcoming in these different parts of yourself and finding home within, what does the more than human, the animals, the plants, the world around us, how does that connect into how you learn to do that?
Oh, I mean, it's really wonderful. I think it's hilarious, I should say, first off, that human beings think that we have, we have the only brains and hearts and bodies that experience um, deep emotion. So letting go of that idea let me feel much more connected to the world. And it let me be able to connect more to people individually as well. And I think connection, this is so cheesy because everybody says it, but it's so true. Connection is really necessary. It's possible and necessary for any kind of liberatory work or even any kind of personal growth, I think. Um, I just lost my train of thought. Please repeat your question. Oh, no, the
Mhm.
animal thing. Well, we're going to get into the animal thing a little bit later. But it made me feel, I've always, even since I was a kid, I've always wanted to be closer to animals. I guess I watched a lot of like Jungle Book or whatever, but I always wanted to live somewhere in a jungle, just me and creatures and no human language necessary, just living on the land. And realizing later in life, later than that first dream, that animals really do, or at least many of the ones that I'm familiar with, really do grieve. And also other things that are positive. Well, grieving can be positive, but they also feel joy. They also can be mischievous. They also play jokes. They're very much like us, almost to the point that I would say there really is no them and us. Um, but being close to the natural world and getting closer to the natural world, and by that I mean spending more time out in it, spending more time trying to defend it, that has led to a sort of peacefulness in my heart. It feels like it's something I'm supposed to be doing, and it's one of the things that lets me sleep at night.
Actually be able to sleep at night.
Hmm.
Mhm.
When time allows.
When time. Exactly. Many of us are time travelers, whether or not we get to choose what way we get dragged all
Mm-mm.
the time. Sometimes we definitely are like, oh, yes, this direction. Others, we just get pulled.
Just get pulled.
And there was a moment where you mentioned connectedness too in
Mhm.
what you were last sharing. And I think for so many of us that like connectedness has a different level of risk, like
Sure.
connectedness to family isn't always what we want it to be,
Mm-mm.
coworkers, neighbors. the people right outside or the people from the places we've come from may not be there. And I hear you also holding connectedness as necessary.
It is
And
necessary, but I'm sorry, I cut you
yeah,
off. Please
please go
continue.
for it.
I was going to say it is necessary, but it is also very scary. It is because if you have connectedness, you can also have loss to that connection.
Mhm.
And when you lose a connection, that even in itself can cause a huge amount of grief. Um, Losing support, losing friends, losing love, all that kind of connectedness is so important, but a lot of people don't risk it because losing it can hurt so bad. It's
And,
my opinion, that it's actually worth the risk, but that would not have been my opinion 10 years ago.
mm,
So,
yeah, what changed?
frankly, to be honest, I started going to therapy, like a really good therapist where I really did the work. Um, yeah, that really, really, really helped that.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks for the honesty.
Hmm.
I love that. Yeah. And the holding that, like, not every therapist is a match, too.
No, not at all.
I've
Yeah.
definitely had therapists where I'm like, this is, I guess I'm supposed to do this. And then later I've been like, oh, wait, I could have just said no and said,
Right.
let's find something else.
No, full stop, full sentence, but you didn't because the world told you you probably shouldn't. It's hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. And to find the love of, like, the risk of loving. For me, a teacher has shared a lot about, like, grief often is the love that was unexpressed.
Mm,
It's the love that we were feeling, and then when the connection isn't the same, we continue to feel that love, which hurts.
yeah.
And yet sometimes there's a sweetness to it too.
There is a sweetness, and I'm going to quote someone, and I regret that I don't remember who it was, but someone once said, "What is grief but love persevering?"
Mm,
And I really think sometimes that's very true. Sometimes when you lose someone and you grieve them, it really is an outpouring of maybe all the love that you had left to give them that you can't anymore.
mhm.
Um, yeah, I love that quote.
Oh, yeah, love unexpressed. Yeah, there's something, it helps me then challenge how I hold, like, overwhelm, in the way that overwhelm can be connected to grief. It's like,
Hmm.
what is there to be expressed? The way that rage sometimes is part of grief. Like, what is the love
Mm,
there? Like being with friends in connection to the election right afterwards who were just angry, and to be with the love that was underneath that anger and the righteousness that was there,
hmm.
even if,
Righteous anger is a powerful, beautiful thing.
yeah.
So, so wonderful. Um, the election, I part of me wanted to put that into the piece to talk about, the loss that I'm feeling of my national identity and how I don't have pride in that any longer. But I'm so devastated by it still that I still can't even talk about it. I will, I will, because we have work to do. But
Mhm.
right now, it's not January yet.
Uh,
And I'm just, that'll come out in this piece or another one. That's real grief and anger. And in this example that you gave, it looks obvious, right, where the anger comes from.
mhm,
But when it's like the death of a loved one, it's like, where do you put it? You can't put it on a politician. Like, where does that go? It's really hard. It's really hard to deal with something. Grief just feels so beyond us sometimes. I know for a fact that it isn't, but it can really just feel that, to use your word, overwhelming. I think you're right. It is because it's so mixed up in other things, like you said, anger, and loss, feeling lost, like actually feeling that your place in the world has been yanked away from you and you don't know where you are.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
you know.
Like eliciting so many things. And I only want to ask one more question. And so
Okay.
I'm going to cheat on my way to the question because
Hmm.
you're making me also think of practices too. Like later in this program, we'll be doing a practice around grief and ways to express grief. Uh,
Mm.
and even if it doesn't always make sense. And I'm thinking about the practice of getting lost too,
Mm.
which can carry a whole different risk. And sometimes I find so helpful to just get lost. Like to go to, for me, I love the woods, but I love the desert to get lost in. Maybe there's something about the
Ooh.
trees. It's a different thing. The desert, I just trust in a different way. Even not
Mm-hmm.
being from desert land, I'm like, no, I could get lost here and sit on a path with a coyote or follow the birds and
Mm.
not know all of this and how that helps me then be in relationship
Oh
with
yeah.
not knowing that feels so central. Like in my gut, I feel like grief often is like, am I willing to be with I don't know what's on the other side? Which often is the artist's challenge too. How do I
Mm-hmm.
be with I don't know what's on the other side? And before we then head back into this last part of the reading, I'm curious for you as an artist, like how do you be with the not knowing in this moment? It may be different in a year, it may be different in five
Right.
years.
It's been the same for quite some time, actually, and I kind of have a cheat code that I was born with, and that is, I love to know. Finding out, figuring out makes me so happy. So presenting me with, I don't know what's next, to me sounds like, oh, cool, we get to figure out what's next. It's just, I think my perspective is that, and so it makes it easier on me. But I didn't grow that perspective. I don't believe. I think it's just innate, this particular need, this wanting of knowledge and feeling that it's learning, it's just fun. My brain just loves details. So, and a
Mm.
little bit of a challenge. So I think if you love details, for me, loving details and loving a challenge makes these challenges, it doesn't have the same feeling as something I'm going up against, as opposed to riding and going along with until, I get the understanding that I'm hoping for, or the understanding that I didn't want but needed, depending.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, then with the getting into the details and knowing it, I want to invite us all to get to know the rest of this piece that you've been writing.
Thanks.
And so I'm going to turn back off my video and give it back over to you.
Sweet. Learning our history always left me wanting answers to questions no one knew how to discuss. And these old wounds, shaken national identity, blackness, queerness, neurospiciness, gently touch down on my most recent societal injury that still sees red and lashes out, right where my she meets my he, meets my inner flock of shiny birds, each with a spirit that doesn't bother with bodies or expectations. Unfolding grief, a delicate process. Sorrow drips through its fingers, messing everything. So tiring. But knowing myself is a grand prize. My gender queerness is a thing I'm still figuring out. It's a small but hardy creature, furtive and quick, with clever hands that it uses to build gently upon itself. My transness bubbles up like a little cold, fresh stream from the fecundity of my mind. It peers about through my eyes, reinforming me about my place in the world. It whispers forgiving murmurs when I think of the many identities I clung to, but had to let go of, with profound thanks. It says hopeful things about my future self, one who has fully and bravely embraced all of themselves. Being genderqueer is one of my favorite things about myself, but it has also been a source of pain and grief. I used to love being a lesbian. I love going to lesbian and queer woman marches. I love my women only friends, women only bars, lesbian events, and I love dating as a lesbian. The camaraderie that can be shared between people who all identify as the same can be so strong and so comfortable. And when those folks are marginalized, it gives safety to bring forth true emotions and gives a place to hold space for each other. I was loath to let that go. I love women, but I am not a woman. and I have been less welcome in those spaces. It's understandable, and I absolutely respect it, but it hurts. And leaving the comfort of the lesbian circle was sad and terrifying. Standing more closely to my truth has caused a lot of loss. Loss of identity, I found it again. Loss of family, friends, loss of relative safety, cognitive dissonance, loss of relative freedom, loss of my previous ability to take up space. Grief is so rough and so heavy and so difficult to maneuver through. And it really can feel that there is simply no dealing with it. It's too big. It's too plentiful. It's too damn ubiquitous. And there are so few examples on how to deal with grief in a healthy way, how to absorb what can be useful about it, and how to let the rest go. Bleak, bleak, bleak. But there are some examples, and not all of them are human in design. As a parting gift, I offer 2 animal grief practices, hippo grief and cockatiel grief. Hippos will hold vigils. When it's become clear that one of them has died, and if the terrain makes it possible, they will gather around the body, nudge it, and lick it. Then they form a close circle around it, turn their backs, and lay down, facing away from it. They stay that way for quite a while, and then some secret signal makes them all get up and walk away, the ritual complete. What I take from this, I'm not sure, but it does make me feel more connected to nature, which we are a part of, whether we accept that or not. I had 2 cockatiels not so long ago. They had been in my family for years, and they were elderly little busybodies, Oscar and Bubs. They were brothers. One day, Bubs died, and I placed his body at the bottom of their flight cage so Oscar could be sure Bubs was gone and wouldn't pine away ages expecting him to come back. Oscar absolutely shocked me by holding his own vigil for Bubs. He went to the bottom of the cage, near Bubs, and started marching and hopping. 1, 2, 3, hop. 1, 2, 3, hop. Back and forth. 1, 2, 3, hop. Each hop was accompanied by a quiet little squeak. This went on for hours. When he seemed done, I removed Bub's body, and Oscar screamed and screamed until I put his brother's body back in the cage. Oscar took up the march. 1, 2, 3, hop, squeak. Finally, he stopped, went to the top of the cage, ate and sipped some water, and stayed there. So I knew it really was okay to remove the body. And this time when I did, Oscar was calm. What I take from this is, 1, even little bitty animals grieve and need to express that heaviness. And 2, there is no rushing the process. I look forward to continuing to grow through the grief. The closer I come to healing, the sounder I feel. Even hippos and birds know that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for sharing, Mo. I
Mm-hmm.
like have the like poetry clap snaps going on.
Little bit.
Oh, thank you for this opening and this offering, this invitation into practices and knowing a little bit more.
You're so welcome. And thank you for inviting me to this. It's always nice when a friend thinks that you have something worthwhile to say. And it's always nice when a friend trusts you to say that, um, honestly and completely, and with respect as well. It meant a lot to be called into this, and I really appreciate the opportunity to think on this again.
Glad and grateful, and look forward to that future as I also feel so much appreciation for you and even being invited to like hold this larger container
Mm-hmm.
our time. And so thank you again, Mo.
You're so welcome.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you, Mo, for listening. And just to lift up some of what's in the chat, because we are again working with time travel. So into the future, just sharing that so was so beautiful and the tears that people are naming in the chat along with stars. And someone found the quote, the what is grief if not love persevering? That quote was from WandaVision. And I'm so grateful. Mm. Wow. And now that I want to invite us a little into the present together. And part of what I want to invite us to do is to be in the present in a way that we are with ourselves where we are. Because to be able to grieve, one thing that happens is our nervous system needs to know it's okay. I'm not gonna die right now, or the lion isn't about to attack me, or in these 5 seconds I'll be okay. And we'll keep coming back to these practices of being present. But one that I just want to share right now, and I'll give a heads up for those of you who are joining live, is after we do this, there's going to be about a 10-minute break on the other side. And in this practice, what I'm going to invite us to do is to really be with our environment, our physical environment around us right now. And for some folks, I'm going to be inviting you to actually move like your head and your body slowly. It may seem even slower than you ever were asked to do this before. And for those of you for whom that is not feeling good or inaccessible, you may just move your eyes when I talk about going to the left or the right or up or down. And for those of you for whom that's still not the thing right now, or your eyes are closed right now, or visual stimuli isn't how you're accessing this, I want to invite you to actually think about the sides of your body when we are there. And I'll give some of these prompts as we go along. And this will be just a few minutes of this activity, really scanning our environment to time travel a little bit more to the present. Because sometimes, even in the present, we're living in the fantasy of what may be the present. And I am all for fantasy and fiction and creating worlds. And sometimes it's helpful to return to a springboard place of the present. And so I invite you wherever you are to first just take a breath if that feels good for you, if it does. And just be where you are, whether standing or sitting. And I invite you to start to look to your left, taking in all of the little details. And if you're going slowly, try to go a little slower than that. To see the edge of your computer screen, to see what's just past there. Just notice the colors, the textures, the corners of the doors and walls, the things that you may pass every day and just don't always slow down with. And my invitation is for you to go all the way as far back as you can, if turning works for you, even to twisting your waist a little bit, to look behind on this side. And if you're feeling internally, to feel the clothes on your arms and legs inside. And then start to look back towards the middle, taking back in what you saw and also the aspects that you didn't notice last time. The little crack in the wall, the ridges and the paint colors, the pictures that are hung or are looking to be hung up. And you'll even start to see a computer screen or a TV in front or a phone. And then as you start to hit the center, keep going to the right till you pass that screen again, or in your body, you pass the middle of your clothes and start noticing out towards your right side. And breathing and taking in the details. Maybe there's a window or a plant. Really look looking at the details. If you see books, you can see the words on the sides of those books, the album covers, or the colors, or even just the textures of your clothing and the temperatures you notice or the pressure on your skin as you look all the way to the back if you can, and then start to return back to the present and to the front, really seeing what is around you right now. Where are you at this moment? It may be 2024 if you're here live. What does it look like? And if it is another time, what does it look like right now in just this second as you come back towards the front? Notice any other details. And as you make your way back towards the center, I invite you next to look up. You may turn your eyes slowly up without moving your body. You may start to tilt up and see the wall past the computer, the room, the plants or open areas, maybe even people. Keep looking up. And if you're feeling, feel into your head, your neck, your head. I invite you to go all the way up to the ceiling if that works for you, to notice that dusty part that you never look at. The crevices and corners that you may only see in bed. And if you are in bed, taking your time to linger there and then start to come back down, soaking in the room there, just what is in front of you in this moment. Feeling those moments of, oh, I thought that was there. It's grief. It's okay to let that feeling be there and start to look down too. You may pass your screen. You may start to see a table or a plate of food, a drink, your own legs, the floor. You may be feeling your seat and your feet so fully, feeling the down. And when you're all the way down, start to come back up, again, taking in what you saw on your way down and what you missed. Maybe the legs of that table, a pen or a pencil or a fork, your skin, the bottom of your screen, that dirt on your keyboard, feeling up through your legs if you're feeling internally, and starting to come back here to this moment here where there's a screen too, and the fullness that's in front of you. And I invite you to breathe here, if that is what works for you. And if focusing on your breath doesn't, just to take in the sight or the feeling of what is in front of you, screen and more, as an invitation here into this present moment. And just notice what it's like to be in the present. And we'll take a short break right here. And so for those of you here on Zoom, we'll be back at 16 minutes past the hour. And if you don't remember that, I'll put it in the chat, because 16 minutes past the hour is going to be different for so many of us. And during this break, we will not have interpretation, but I'll likely bring us back with a song. See you in 10 minutes. And am I born to die, to lay this body down? And must my trembling spirit fly into a world unknown? It's a song that I learned from folks who live outside of a city who have a much different relationship with grief and with unknown. And even the whole song is a question. Oh, we're headed into this next portion of our time together, where first we're going to do a little bit of journaling. Then we'll do some time traveling, which I'll explain as we're in the midst of jumping times. But I invite you, if you have something nearby that you want to write with, to grab that composition notebook or open up a tab on your computer and have that available. Because in the second half, we're gonna use some practices that bring us into relationship with grief as it may live with us now or near us now. And I'll have some journal prompts along the way. So just start to gather whatever you need and come back to that more comfortable spot. And maybe you found it when you moved. I know I just moved and started standing. And what I want to invite you to do is just take a moment, and I'm going to give you a question. And I'm going to invite you to scan where do you notice reactions inside of your own body or around you? And I also want to welcome along the way, you may notice nothing, or, oh, I don't feel something there, and that's okay to also notice that too. So the first invitation as you start to scan in and around your body is in relation to this question. How do I let myself grieve? How do I let myself grieve? And I just invite you to scan maybe from head to toe and around your body. Just where do you notice something that catches your attention? Is it a knot in your throat, feeling nearby your arm, something moving through your legs or torso? Just to notice these pieces. And if it's more than one, welcome that. Or it might be a temperature that you notice, cool or warm. And if it's helpful for you to share it in the chat, you're welcome to. It's helpful for you to just journal to keep track. That's welcome. And if you just have it, welcome. And for now, just notice it, and you don't have to make meaning of it. Just invite you to see it as it is, just for a moment. Yeah. I see some folks are already saying heaviness in the chest or aching there, or tightness in their throat or ache behind their eyes. Yeah. Coloring and lip shaking. All of those, whatever you notice, yeah, even if pain, just that is fine. And as you're there noticing it, I want to invite you, if you have a few feelings, to see which one is catching your attention most for this moment and saying it might need a little bit more attention. And from that place, if you have your journal, to write a response to this question, what do you want me to know? What do you want me to know? And just invite you for a moment to just journal on that prompt. And let the voice come from that place in or around you, whether that's your hollowing in your belly or a cloudiness. You don't need to make sense of what comes out. I invite you to just have the pen and let it move, or colored pencil. Keys on the keyboard. If it says that's fine. Just take a moment here to journal. What do you want me to know? Asking it of that place in you, that part of you. I'll just give you a little bit more time here to write, about a minute. Just take a little bit more time writing. And as you start to find an end to that spot, and you may need to keep writing, that's okay. This will also be recorded, so you can always come back, or if you're watching it later, you can hit pause. The next prompt that I want to invite you to do is just first read what you wrote. See what that part of you is wanting to let you know. And notice how you feel as you read it. Really listening to that part of you that showed up in that scan. That one that asked for a little bit more attention now. As you finish reading, here's a next prompt, which is to journal on what do you need to trust me to be with grief? Just to ask that part of you, that cloudiness, that heaviness in your chest, or that ache behind your eyes. Just ask it, what do you need to trust me to be with grief? And it doesn't have to make sense. Just let your hand move, or on your keyboard type. As you write, it might be something small that you may be able to do, like you just hold me in a little bit. That's welcome. It may say, I need you to go somewhere else, do something. And to just be with that request as an invitation for you to come back to again after our time together, to keep getting to come back into relationship with grief a little bit more. And you can ask that part if it's asking for something that feels like it'll take more time. You can just journal, what might you need right now to let you be with grief a little bit, just for a couple minutes. I invite you to extend some appreciation to that place in you, as well as some acknowledgement of maybe those other places that showed up, those other parts, that in the future you may be able to come back to. And if that part said, I want to be surrounded and not be alone, in this moment, you may be able to tell that part of you, hey, I'm here with you. And we're here with you to witness and to be with you, not to pry, not to get in the way, but to really not have you be alone. And as you finish journaling, I invite you back into this YouTube or Zoom. And if you had to pause again, that's okay. What I'm going to invite you to do next is we're going to actually be with grief a little bit more in a practice. You want to let that pen down for a moment, to let yourself out of that place. And we're going to enter a practice guided by Christiana Smith, who I reached out to because I saw that they had this really helpful practice. And she's someone who's also plays with imagination and change. And what I appreciate about them is the ways that they give really clear practices. And so this is Christiana's practice called Grief, Ground, Imagine, Strategize. And there are 4 stages that we'll go through. And I'll play a video that Christiana built with talking with me about this event. And there'll be moments where I pause the video to go deeper, to let us dive a little bit deeper. And there'll be moments where there'll be a separate prompt for the YouTube folks than for those of you who are live here in Zoom too. You don't have to keep track of it. I'll let you know when it comes. It'll be pretty straightforward in those moments. And I want to acknowledge the riskiness of imagining too, which can feel almost impossible when the world feels like it's bearing down on us. And for those of us who come from people or are people who, you don't know people who've been older than you who are like you. I think for myself as a trans person to imagine into the future has often been one of the scariest places to go because it feels impossible. And yet, when I've given myself the gift of doing it a little bit, it creates a little bit more possibility for my existence to exceed my life expectancy. And so I invite those of you as we move into imagining as part of this process to imagine just a little bit, as much as you're able. And if that as much as you're able is not today, that's today. Yeah. And so I'll play this video. And if you have your sensory sticks, you can grab them, pens or glitter. There'll be journal prompts along the way. There'll also be some body activity invitations too. I'll pass it over to Christiana to move us into this next portion.
Hi, my name is Christiana Smith. I'm a liberation culture worker and somebody insatiably curious about how we bring our collective imagination to life. And one of the things that I have been noticing in these moments is that we are taking our imagination skills and we're using them to hyperfixate and to lean in to all of the imaginings of the oppressor. All of an oppressor's sweetest dream is what a lot of our power is going towards. And that's reasonable. It's one of the things that happens when anxiety and our survival mechanisms kick off. That being said, we need to reclaim our imaginative power so that we can strategize not just against the things that we don't want, but actively towards the world that we would like to build and see and cultivate with one another. This practice comes out of work that I have done to create a book. It's called Harvesting Chaos, and it's about 5 practices that we use to just create everyday liberation. I'm also going to say that we're going to be doing this short practice in the span of maybe 15, 20 minutes. And so if you don't have enough time right now to go through each piece the way your body wants to, this is not a place to shame yourself. This is not a place to be like, oh my gosh, I'm not getting it. I'm not good at it. Some of this takes time. Anytime I'm not able to imagine the future I want, it's just a reminder to me that I need to go back and grieve what it is I'm avoiding and ground in the reality that I'm in this moment. Okay. So grieve, ground, imagine, strategize. That's what we're going to do right now. So I'm going to back up a little bit for my computer. Now I want you to think about a time that you were constipated or a time that you had like some tense tummy stuff going on, or if you've given birth, because we are going to try and just activate like below the diaphragm, like our gut region. And we're going to try and activate that, just send some vibrations towards it, to loosen anything that might be stuck in there. When we get into our stress mode, when our body is doing that freeze, fight, fawn and stuff, it is actively going to shut down our digestive tract. And so one of the things that we have to do when we go to be in our imagining brain and like cue the body that we are no longer in a life or death situation in this moment, we have to activate the digestive tract. We have to like put energy back in there. So the body goes like, oh, okay. So it's time to like release and process some of the feeling that I was cutting off before. So feet on the ground, get your body as comfortable as you can get it wherever you're at. And we are going to do that I just did. I would call that a light sigh. We are going to do some deep sighs, not heavy sighs, deep sighs. You're going to sigh out with a vocalization that vibrates that lower part of your body. So you're going to breathe in and breathe out with a sound. Oof.
And I invite you to just try that for a moment. To try at least 3 of those breaths, those vocalized deep sighs.
Now, when we do this, feelings might come up. Rage, grief, sometimes laughter, sometimes joy, sometimes confusion, but just stuff that got caught in there loosens up. Now, if we had more time, I would invite you to put on music and dance in this moment. I would invite you to write about any like stream of consciousness about what's happening in this moment. But for this sort of
And luckily, we don't have to do the abbreviated practice that Christiana is saying. So if you're on YouTube later, there's a card to a playlist that you can click. It's a bunch of grief songs. Those on Zoom will get it sent afterwards. And if you're here on Zoom, I invite you to free write for just, we'll give it 2 minutes. Just what's coming up as you do that after those sighs. By free write, just let your pen move across the page, your pencil. What's coming up? About half the time for journaling, so you have a little bit more time to just write what's coming up. And Christiana will pick us up.
Abbreviated practice, what we're going to do instead is we're going to take another breath with the sound. And this time, from that activated gut space, we're going to push all of that vibration into our feet. And I want you to imagine like you're going to throw it into the ground and the ground is sort of going to catch it for you. The land that you're on is going to be the catcher that just grabs that energy and puts it into the earth itself. Okay? It'll look a little like this. Woo. Woo. Mm. 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 You might feel yourself shake out your toes. And you're going to feel like a little coming back to yourself in this moment.
So we're just going to try that. Try one or two of those sighs to push the vibration from your gut all the way down to the earth. So, and then just feel whatever is there in this moment.
Mm. Once we're here, this tends to be where people stop because we've gone through the feeling and we're like, yeah, now I'm good. I'm good. I'm back to, I've stabilized. And this is where I want to push us that there's even a better feeling than this feeling right now, that there's even more possible. And that is what imagination work is. And I can even just sometimes feel myself sort of like pressing. I can feel like a pressure when I go to tap into my imagination. Like there's a ceiling right here. And I'm like, okay, but I'm good now. What if I imagine something and I don't feel good after, right? Like worry and shame and anxiety sort of creeping in. And so I'm going to invite you to just know that you're in your whole self. In this moment, you are safe, you are whole. And we're going to do a little bit of imagination work. So we are going to think of you in the future 20 years from now. And I want you to think of some very simple, mundane thing that you could be doing 20 years from now. When I do this, I tend to think of myself drinking out of a mug. I don't know if I'm always drinking tea or if I'm drinking, maybe whiskey or if I'm drinking coffee, but I am drinking something out of a mug. And I want you to think about like what the thing is that you could be doing. You could be reading a book. You could be sitting on a porch. You could be having a bite of a really yummy dessert. But something that you are doing that is simple and mundane and gives you 5 seconds of peace. There's a version of you, 20 years older, 20 years wiser, 20 years more stuff. And they are existing in this moment, doing this simple, mundane thing, just letting their mind wander. In this version of you, I want you to really tap in, like, what are they smelling? What are they hearing? What are they tasting? How's the air or their clothes feel on their skin? Hmm. And as they're just letting their mind wander, this you 20 years in the future, they think back to this moment, to this workshop, this exercise, this video that you're watching with this person in a cable knit sweater, and they whisper something back in time to you. And if you can't hear what they whisper, if it's just a feeling that you get, let the feeling come in. If it feels like they're showing you something, let the image come in. We do this so often in the reverse. We think back to a point in our lives and sort of project an idea or a thought or a hope back to a younger version of ourselves. And in this moment, we're just doing that in the reverse. We're allowing our brain and our spirit to sort of go forward in time and glean some wisdom from our own being. And if you can write that message down, capture it in some way, this thing that older you is offering.
So I invite you to do. You may want to take a color pen that you haven't been using. If you have those glitter pens, you may want to draw or doodle, even if just that feeling came up. Maybe it's where that feeling is, or describing the feeling, or just an abstract. It doesn't need to be literal, but capture in some way that wisdom that older you shared with you, that older self shared with you.
Now, this moment, I call this future remembering, this imagination practice. This moment is a thing that we're going to use to sort of lock in to this time stream, to this version of reality where you're in the future doing that thing. And we're going to just believe that that is possible, that that is real, that because it can be imagined, it exists. And now we are going to sit and we are going to strategize. And you are going to answer sort of 3 strategic prompts for yourself. The first one is just what's something you could do in the next 48 hours to move closer to that version of reality? Just 48 hours. What's something that you can participate? Maybe it's something you've already planned to do. Maybe it's something you've thought of doing and you're like, oh, I haven't gotten it done. But like, what's something you can plan to do in the next 48 hours that moves you towards that version of reality? What's something that you can do in the next week with another person, one other person that can move you closer to that version of reality? And then what's something that you can plan for the next month with like 5-ish people? Doesn't have to be 100 people, doesn't have to be 10 or 20, just 5 other people and you. What could you do in the next month to move you closer to that version of reality?
And so just invite you to journal for a moment about what's that something that you can do in the next 48 hours alone. It can be small. It could just be holding a mug. It could be hearing your voice in a way. When mine came, it said singing low, which is so opposite the message that society gives me as a trans femme. Yeah. Just what can you do in 48 hours alone? And then what's something you can do in 1 week with a friend? It's one other person. That person could be on a Discord server with you. They're not there in person with you. I'm going to give you a chance to journal on that last prompt of what is something you can do in a month with 5-ish people. Doesn't have to be 100, as Christiana said. It could just be 5-ish. Maybe where you are, it's like 3. Maybe it's 8 because you know you get together with these 8 people. What's something you can do in a month with 5-ish people that would move you a little bit closer towards this reality you envisioned, towards what that future self shared with you? Even if that future self is 97. Even if that future self is 37. And then lastly, who is someone who can hold you accountable to these actions? By accountable, it's not this is the person saying you're doing it right or wrong. It's a person who's inviting you to be in relationship. Say, yeah, I want to help you stay in relationship with this. Accountability isn't a one-way punitive thing. Accountability is about a commitment between. And in this moment, it's towards this future self who invited you to something. So who's someone who can hold you accountable to these actions? And for those of you on Zoom, we can send a message out in a week too, just as a follow-up reminder.
A little offerings if you're like, well, I'm stuck. How, if I knew how to get there, I'd get there, right? That's something I hear often. One, I want to remind you that, like, if you can imagine it, we can make it happen. And sometimes it's the mundane things in that future that we can enjoy right now. So, if it's sitting on a couch right now, my future self was sitting on a couch, and just was real snuggled in. You can experience that same comfort right now. I could sit on a couch right now and snuggle in and hold a warm drink in my hand. If it's something that you imagine being able to do, like being surrounded by love or surrounded by people who cared about you, maybe that's the thing that you do in a week with one other person. So it doesn't have to be these large systemic level impacts. We can actually just strategize at the very hyper local, meaning your body level of a thing that we can do that will also be true in the liberated world. And we can use that as our one little glimmer of how we move towards the next thing. After you've come up with this plan, I'm going to ask that you also think of an accountability buddy. Think of somebody that you can ask to check in on you, that you can maybe thought partner with and share some ideas, who will be able to hold you to just doing the thing in 48 hours, the thing with one other person a week, and the thing with 5 other people in a month. If at any time the strategy feels like it's buzzing into anxiety and like nothing is possible, go all the way back to the beginning, back to that grief moment, to the grounding moment, and then remember to lock back in with your future self. And it is this whole little practice that I think keeps us aligned to being responsible for enacting what we want versus being defensive around what we don't want only, right? We have to defend, but we don't have to only be focused on defense. And it keeps us from being passive and harm to other people and harms to ourselves. Thank you so much for your time, for being with me today. You can find me on the socials, and you can check out my book at harvestingchaos.com. And I hope that the time that you have here today feeds your soul, and that you are able to do what is within your capacity and accomplish in moments to bring about the liberation you see for the world. Bye, y'all.
Yeah, thank you, Christiana. Thank you so much. Just sharing the appreciation in the chat. At least one person said, as someone who struggles to imagine the future, imagining the mundane made it so much more accessible. Thank you. Thank you. My heart feels so grateful. For those of you who are here in the Zoom, I'll also put a link to that workbook Christiana shared, a copy for those of us who'd be here in Zoom. And if you signed up through Forge's account, you'll get it in the follow-up message too. It's a link to a version of that workbook that goes a little further into these 4 stages, and then the Harvesting Chaos workbook goes way more into all of them. And so really want to share resource with you as we move forward. And so in these final moments that we have together, I am really grateful for our time traveling. Like I again, like that last time with Christiana, I was like, oh, we're going back and forth in time. Let's see if I can do this right. There we go. We're going back and forth and forth and back. Like, what happened first? What happened second? Like, again, this was a practice. Also, time travel. If you've ever watched Doctor Who, people get lost. You don't always know where you're going to get dropped off. And so this moment, we got to come together from our different paths, and we're about to head to our different paths again from here. And you might be hiking the trail, like I mentioned in the beginning, where you're here live in Zoom together and it's evening or it's afternoon, or you are joining us on the trail from YouTube and feeling the echoes of the full experience with people in community, a community that echoes across time and space. And so we're about to travel on our different paths again from here. And as we head to our different paths, I want to invite you to come back to that place of remembering that there are others out here, even those parts of you, to hold that there are others of us out here traveling these hills, these paths that don't just go one direction, and that we are here in these mountains. And if you've ever been to a mountain, you may know an echo travels. So that there may be a moment where you yell out because you just feel alone. And one of us may hear that echo. And if we don't, maybe a hawk will hear that echo, or a squirrel may hear you, or that tree who has been present with so many across generations can hold your weight and be with you. And so we invite you to hold as you get your walking stick back out, to pass what you carry along and live it in the world. You do not carry this all alone. No, you do not carry this all alone. This is way too hard for you to carry this on your own. So you do not carry this all alone. Those of you, travel safely forward. That song is lingering with you. You just want to keep hearing it. Dropping a link in the chat to a longer version with extended love and kindness and a generous spirit, that we may all be held in our grief, in our overwhelm, in our sadness, in our rage, in our loss, in our not knowing, in our insistence in knowing, and that we are not alone here. We got we. Thank you. Good night, everyone, or afternoon, or good morning if this is your coffee time. Bye.